Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're going to tackle those infamous Santa Ana winds.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know the ones that sweep through Southern California?
Yeah.
We've got a whole bunch of articles from the Los Angeles Times, some of them going back like over 100 years,
Wow.
along with some more recent pieces from WPXI and Cap Radio.
Interesting.
And one thing that immediately jumped out at us was this debate about what to even call them. Santa Ana.
Santana.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it?
Right. Are we talking about a formal name, or is it more like a casual nickname that locals use?
Right.
The LA Times articles really highlight this whole divide.
You see, the common assumption is that the name Santa Ana comes from the Santa Ana Canyon.
Yeah. Seems pretty straightforward.
Right. But if you dig into those Times archives, you'll find that longtime residents insist that Santana.
No capital A?
No capital A. That's the real deal.
Interesting.
And they think that maybe newcomers just kind of fancified it.
There's even a reader in the LA Times back in 1893 who was totally furious about the name Santa Ana.
Oh, wow.
They called it a gross injustice to blame these winds on just one specific spot. This isn't some recent thing. It's been going on for ages.
And what's even more surprising is that the very first time that you see Santa Ana winds appear in the Times, it's not like in some weather report or news story.
Oh, really?
It's in a real estate ad from 1886.
Okay.
Bragging about how a certain property has no fogs nor Santa Ana winds.
Like it's a good thing.
Yeah, like it's a selling point.
Wow. So back then, people wanted to, avoid these winds?
Apparently.
That's crazy. But what about Santana? When does that show up?
Much later. The first time it's mentioned in the Times isn't until 1956.
Oh, wow.
And then in 1981, a Times writer named Jack Smith,
Okay.
he suggests that Santana might just be like a Spanish pronunciation
Ooh.
of Santa Ana. You know how words get slurred over time?
Yes.
Kind of like that.
So maybe not some secret ancient name, but a linguistic evolution.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I've also heard some pretty out there theories about where the name comes from.
Oh, yeah, like what?
What about that whole Native American devil wind thing?
Yeah, that's a popular one.
It sounds good.
But it doesn't really hold up. Linguistically, there's just no connection.
Okay.
And then there's that other story that links it to General Santa Ana's cavalry kicking up all this dust during battles.
Right.
Dramatically appealing.
Yeah.
But also wrong.
Okay.
I mean, Santa Ana's campaigns never even reached Southern California. And plus, let's be honest, the guy was a stickler for spelling his name with two N's.
Details. And I guess that also debunks that St. Anne's Day theory too, right?
All right.
Because those winds don't blow around July 25th.
Exactly. It's tempting to connect it to a Saint's Day, but the timing just doesn't work out.
Right.
So we're left with this intriguing puzzle. Maybe we'll never know for sure where the name came from.
Yeah.
But even the debate itself tells us something, about how these winds have really captured people's imaginations.
Yeah.
And sometimes their anger.
For over a century?
Yeah, for well over a century.
The name itself carries all this history and baggage.
Right.
Speaking of baggage, what about the science behind these notorious winds?
Okay.
Why are they so hot and dry
Yeah.
and powerful? Most people just think of them as wildfire fuel.
Right.
But I bet there's more to the story.
You're right. And to understand their impact, we really need to understand how they work.
Okay.
It all starts with a high-pressure system over the Great Basin.
Okay.
So picture this massive dome of air pressing down over Nevada and Utah.
Oh,
And this forces all this dry air towards the Pacific coast. And as it flows downhill...
Wait, downhill. So the direction matters.
It's crucial. That downward flow is what makes them katabatic winds.
Katabatic winds.
It might sound kind of intimidating, but it just means they're driven by gravity.
Oh, okay.
Imagine pouring honey down a slope. It speeds up and thins out as it flows.
Right.
Same thing happens with these winds as they come down from the mountains towards the coast. They compress and they heat up, which explains why they feel so much hotter than the air that they displace.
So it's not just the desert heat being blown in.
Right.
The descent itself makes them hotter.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. And what about the dryness? Does that tie into this downhill flow too?
Absolutely. As the air compresses, it loses its ability to hold moisture, so it becomes incredibly dry.
Okay.
And then you've got these narrow mountain passes acting like giant nozzles,
Right.
squeezing and accelerating the wind even further.
It's like when you feel that blast of wind walking between tall buildings,
Right.
only on a much larger scale.
Exactly.
So we've got this hot, dry air
Yep.
being squeezed through mountain passes at high speed.
Uh-huh.
No wonder they're so notorious for fanning wildfires.
Right. And those recent fires in 2025, which we read about in those WPXI and CAP radio articles, they were especially intense because these Santa Anas were like supercharged.
Oh, wow.
By these powerful upper-level winds.
Okay.
Mike Wofford from the National Weather Service, he said it was like a double whammy, resulting in gusts of over 100 miles per hour.
Wow, that's scary. And I remember reading that those fires were fueled by all that extra vegetation that grew after those unusually wet years we had back in 2023 and 2024.
Yeah, it's like all these factors were lining up for this perfect firestorm.
It's crazy.
UCLA professor Park Williams, he pointed out that all this excess vegetation basically provided a massive fuel load for the fires.
Wow.
So you've got the powerful winds, the dry conditions, and then all this extra fuel just waiting to ignite.
Yeah.
It's a sobering reminder of how interconnected these things are.
And we can't forget about the elephant in the room.
Right.
Climate change.
Yeah.
While it might not be causing the Santa Anas directly, it's definitely influencing the conditions that make them so dangerous.
Absolutely. Professor Ting, who we mentioned earlier, he highlighted how climate change is making the region even drier, creating this tinderbox situation.
Right.
So even if the Santa Anas themselves aren't changing, the landscape is becoming way more vulnerable to their effects.
So we've got this intense name debate.
Yeah.
The science of these downhill winds and the whole wildfire connection. But are wildfires like the only thing these winds affect? I have a feeling there's a whole other side to this story.
You're right. The Santa Anas have a surprisingly diverse impact on Southern California beyond just fueling flames.
Okay.
Some of it's actually quite positive.
Oh, really?
While other effects are definitely not so welcome.
Interesting.
Let's dive into those next.
Okay. So we've covered like the science and all the serious stuff, but I've always heard these winds have a reputation.
Oh, yeah.
Like they mess with people's moods or something. Is that just folklore or is there something to it?
That's where things get really interesting. You know, the Santa Anas aren't just some weather phenomenon.
Right.
They're woven into the cultural fabric of Southern California. I mean, they pop up in novels, movies, songs.
Oh, yeah.
They're often portrayed as these like mysterious, almost mythical forces stirring up more than just dust and leaves.
They're not just fire hazards, but mood hazards too.
Yeah, possibly.
What are we talking about here?
Well, there's this long-held belief that when the Santa Anas blow, people get edgy, restless, even anxious. Some folks blame everything on the winds.
Really?
From fender benders to family arguments.
Wow, so is everyone just using the Santa Anas as a scapegoat for bad behavior? Or could there be some, like, real connection?
Right.
I mean, I know I've felt that kind of restless energy when they're blowing.
Yeah, it's a question that's fascinated people for generations.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer.
Right.
Scientists haven't found a definitive link between the winds and human behavior.
Okay.
But there are some intriguing theories.
Ooh, lay it on me. I love a good scientific mystery.
Well, some researchers think it might be the sound.
The sound.
Yeah, the Santa Anas often produce these low-frequency sound waves that we can't consciously hear, but they might be affecting us on a subconscious level, kind of like how some people react to, like, infrasound.
So like a subliminal wind song messing with our vibes? That's kind of creepy.
Right.
But also kind of cool.
And then there's the possibility that changes in air pressure or ion concentrations, which happen when the Santa Anas blow, could be influencing our brain chemistry.
Interesting.
It's still very much in the realm of speculation.
Yeah.
It's not entirely out there.
I mean, we know that weather affects mood in general. Right. Sunny days, rainy days.
Exactly.
Maybe these intense winds just take it to another level.
Right. And even if there's no proven physiological link, the fact that this belief persists so strongly says something, you know, about the power that these winds hold over our imaginations. They've become a symbol of this untamed, unpredictable element that we just can't control.
That makes sense. I'm thinking about all those stories in movies. Where the Santa Anas are practically like a character. Driving the plot. You know, creating this intense, almost ominous atmosphere.
Right. It's like they represent this raw elemental force. And that can be both exhilarating and a little bit terrifying. You never know what they'll bring, but you know they're going to shake things up.
It's like a love-hate relationship. We're drawn to their power and mystique, but we also know they can be destructive.
Precisely. They embody this duality that makes them so compelling. both scientifically and culturally.
Right.
We want to understand them, predict them, maybe even tame them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a part of us that recognizes their wildness and respects their power.
So we're fascinated by them, but also kind of scared of them. I can relate to that. It's like that saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Right.
Except in this case, it's more like keep your wind patterns close and your anxiety meds closer.
Yeah. Maybe that's the best way to put it. But all jokes aside, the Santa Anas are a force to be reckoned with. Yeah. They're part of Southern California's story, and learning to live with them safely and sustainably is a challenge we need to take seriously.
Okay, so we can't just wish them away or blame them for all our problems. We have to figure out how to coexist.
Yeah.
But with wildfires getting worse and climate change making everything drier, how do we even begin to adapt?
That's the million-dollar question, and there's no single answer.
Right.
It's going to take a multi-pronged approach.
Okay.
With individuals, communities, and policymakers all working together.
So give us the game plan. What can we actually do both on a personal level and as a society to prepare for and mitigate the impact of these winds?
Well, on an individual level, it starts with awareness.
Okay.
Knowing when the Santa Anas are expected, having an evacuation plan ready.
Okay.
And taking steps to fireproof your property are all essential.
Right.
It's easy to think it won't happen to me.
Yeah.
But being prepared can make all the difference.
It's like that saying, hope for the best, prepare for the wind.
I east.
Okay, I'm workshopping that one.
Okay.
But seriously, you're right. Preparation is key. But what about the bigger picture?
That's where things get a bit more complicated. We need better forest management practices to reduce fuel loads.
Okay.
Smarter urban planning to create defensible spaces around communities.
Right.
And investments in fire-resistant building materials.
Yeah.
We also need to improve our early warning systems and make sure everyone knows how to respond when the Santa Anas start blowing.
It sounds like a massive undertaking.
It is.
But also incredibly important. We can't just keep reacting to these fires after they start.
Right.
We need to be proactive and think long term.
Exactly. It's about building resilience both in our infrastructure and in our communities. And it's not just about fire prevention either. We need to think about how to manage air quality issues.
Right.
Protect our water resources and create a built environment that can withstand these extreme wind events.
It's like we need a whole new way of thinking about how we live in this part of the world, one that takes the Santa Anas into account.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. The Santa Anas are a part of Southern California's DNA.
Yeah.
They're not going anywhere, so we need to learn to live with them in a way that's both safe and sustainable.
And maybe even learn from them. I mean, they've been shaping this landscape for centuries.
Right.
And they've certainly taught us a thing or two about resilience and adaptation.
Absolutely. There's a lot we can learn from these winds, both about nature's power and our own human capacity for ingenuity and adaptation.
So it's not just about surviving the Santa Anas, but thriving in spite of them.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that.
That's the spirit. And as we move towards the end of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to ponder.
Hit me with it. I'm ready for some deep thoughts.
Yeah.
But lay that deep thought on me. What's the big question we should be chewing on?
If these winds could talk, what stories would they tell? What would they say about the changes they've witnessed, the landscapes they've shaped, the lives they've touched over centuries?
Whoa, that's a good one. It's like we've been digging into the science and the history, but what about the Santa Anas' own perspective? What have they seen that we haven't?
Exactly. Imagine the stories those winds could whisper.
Yeah.
About Southern California's transformation.
Yeah.
From like vast ranches to sprawling cities.
Right.
What would they say about our relationship with nature, our successes, our failures?
And our anxieties?
Yeah.
I bet they've seen a lot of that too, especially lately. It's like we're trying to figure out how to live with these winds, but they've been living with us for much longer.
And they'll be here long after we're gone.
Right.
Shaping the landscape and influencing the lives of future generations.
It's kind of humbling.
It is. It's something to think about, especially as we grapple with these challenges of climate change.
Right. It's not just about us. It's about the long game, the big picture.
Right.
And speaking of climate change, that kind of brings us back down to earth, doesn't it? It's easy to get caught up in these winds mystique.
Right.
But we can't ignore the fact that they're also becoming more dangerous.
Absolutely. While the Santa Anas themselves aren't directly caused by climate change,
right,
the conditions that make them so dangerous are definitely being amplified by it.
Yeah.
We've talked about the dryness, the increased vegetation growth,
right,
Those are all factors influenced by a warming planet.
And as temperatures continue to rise, we're likely to see even more extreme fire seasons. So a scary feedback loop.
Yeah.
Hotter temperatures, drier vegetation.
Right.
More fuel for fires.
Yeah.
And the Santa Ana is just fanning the flames.
It's a sobering thought, for sure, but it's also a call to action.
Right.
We can't just sit back and wait for the next firestorm. We need to be proactive, both individually and collectively.
So what can we actually do? We've talked about preparing our homes and being aware of the risks, but what about on a community level? What are some solutions that actually have a chance of making a difference?
Well, there are a lot of smart folks out there working on this.
Okay.
And some communities are already making progress. Things like controlled burns to reduce fuel loads.
Right.
Creating defensible spaces around homes and businesses.
Okay.
And investing in early warning systems are all crucial.
Those are great examples. It's like we can't completely eliminate the risk.
Right.
But we can definitely minimize it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a lot of this comes down to community level planning and action.
It does. And it's not just about putting out fires. It's about preventing them in the first place.
Okay.
We need smarter urban planning, better building codes, and a more holistic approach to land management that takes the Santa Anas into account.
So it's not just about fighting the winds, but working with them right. Recognizing that they're a part of this ecosystem.
Yeah.
And we need to find a way to coexist.
Exactly. It's about building resilience both in our infrastructure and in our communities. And it's not just about fire prevention either. We need to think about how to manage air quality issues, protect our water resources, and create a built environment that can withstand these extreme wind events.
It sounds like a massive undertaking.
It is.
But also incredibly important. It's like the Santa Anas are forcing us to rethink how we live in this part of the world.
And that might be a good thing. Sometimes it takes a challenge to spark innovation and change.
So it's not just about surviving the Santa Anas, but thriving in spite of them. I like the sound of that.
That's the spirit. And I think that's a great note to wrap up our deep dive.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the origins of the name to the science, the impacts, and even the cultural significance of these winds.
It's been a wild ride. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about the Santa Anas themselves, but about how they connect to everything else. History, climate culture, even our own psychology.
That's the beauty of a deep dive, isn't it? It's about making connections, seeing the bigger picture, and understanding how seemingly disparate things are often intertwined.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll even crack the code on that elusive name. Santa Ana or Santana.
Until then, the wind keeps whispering, and we keep listening.
And that's a wrap on today's deep dive into the Santa Ana winds. We hope you enjoyed this whirlwind exploration. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your own Santa Ana stories, or any wind-related wisdom you've picked up along the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.